Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We are coming to you virtually from Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. And today, again, we're heading north of the border. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. This is where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today, north of the border and proudly showing his Ukrainian flags from his heritage, is Phil Simchich. We'll be talking with Phil in just a second. Our guest today is Jed Selter, a good friend of mine. Jed is an author and global community activist. Jed is a leadership thought leader and recently published a book titled The Lion That Flinched, the Cub Who Would Be King. This is a wonderful story and digs into leadership and mentoring principles, and we're going to discuss all of that today with Jed. We're also going to be talking about doing some clowning around with Jed. Stay tuned. You're going to learn more what that means. So, Jed, welcome. We'll be with you in just a minute. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher. We're on YouTube. Everybody, we are ubiquitous. That means we are all over the place. We come to you from about a dozen different cities. We're here in Seattle, but we've got the mothership in Atlanta. We've got Boca Raton. We've got Charleston. We've got Dallas. We've got Columbus, Knoxville, a whole bunch of places. Now, listen, before we bring on Jed, Phil, welcome.
Dan, hello. Great to be here.
First of all, before we get into a little banter, I know that you are of Ukrainian descent and you are proudly showing the Ukrainian flag and the president today from Ukraine. I watched his presentation to Congress. It was incredible. Did you happen to catch that?
No, I've just seen highlights, but yeah, it's how do we marshal the world to get things going? But we're already starting to accept Ukrainian refugees here, so everybody's doing their part.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an important topic, but we've got some important things to talk about today. And listen, you and I, Phil, we have both authored books. In fact, we've collaborated on books and we've individually authored them, correct?
That's correct. So yeah, we've collaborated on about 10 books already.
Yes. And they're all business books. We are writing directly to business people. So we've got to keep it really simple. My pay grade is only kind of the business book. Our guest today has just written what I'd probably call a parable short story. Phil, is that in your wheelhouse? Have you ever done an actual book that has a theme, a story, something like that? Or are you like me, stuck just in business books?
I have absolutely not written a creative story or a novel, and there'd be way too much plot and character development for me to keep track of. As you know, my hobby is photography.
Yeah.
And unlike an artist that starts with a blank canvas, a photographer starts with their lens, and you just figure out what you want to take out of the scene, and then you zoom in with your feet. And so photography is probably at the other end of novel writing.
Yeah, that whole plot thing. I think if I've always wanted to do a mystery, but I would probably have to figure out who done it first and forget halfway through and have to change it. But you know who's really good at this is our good friend Jed Duffy Selter. Jed, welcome to the show. And I want to lead off with this. You are an excellent writer. You've done business books. Now you've written this short story parable about a lion cub. Tell us a little bit about the book, but also how did you come about to writing this?
Thanks, Dan. Phil, Dan, it's great to be with you. Several years ago, I designed and facilitated an all-day workshop in business around the principle of attitude and how one's attitude drives everything that one does in relationships. And over a 3-year period, we had 10,000 people through that from all over Washington state in every sense of business. and leadership in organizations and law firms and unions and hourly workers, et cetera. And when COVID hit, I got very concerned about adolescents who were being isolated at home, being taught at home, and losing their face-to-face interaction with their peer group and with adults and the like. And so I decided to take the principles that we taught in this all-day workshop and turn it into a parable aimed at adolescents in how to understand and develop great relationships, as well as adults who work with adolescents. Although the book, which is a parable and a workshop for adults and adolescents, is also applicable to folks in business. So that's how it came about.
So that seems extremely timely and important. And my daughters are in their 20s now, past the adolescent phase, which was hard enough in normal times, never mind going through COVID and all the social isolation and then cabin fever related to that. What did you find from delivering that virtually and remotely were some of the key factors to connect with the adolescents?
I think that's a great question, Phil. I think the key principles are that we have to look introspectively in how we decide to manage ourselves in dealing with people. And when I thought about the current situation, and I think it's still there, even though kids are going back to school, there has been, I think, a ramped up stress at home because kids are always there, parents are always there, and there was not a huge break in relationships. So for adolescents to be able to take a deep breath and have some skill set that they may not have thought about was really valid and valuable to do.
You know, Jed, I'm not going to spoil this for anybody because I want them to buy the book. I want them to read it. But kind of the main crux comes that the protagonist in your book is a young lion cub, and there's a disconnect in leadership styles between his father and his grandfather, and they kind of have a different worldview and world perspective, and I found it interesting because I know growing up getting into work in the 80s and the 90s, there was a kind of more of a command and control type of philosophy when it came to either collaboration or lack thereof. And that's been changing. And there's a great business lesson here with this young cub and looking at both his father and his grandfather. And like I said, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But could you speak towards that as relates to those of us who are listening, who are in business and maybe leading people?
I came up through management in a Fortune 50 company. And when I retired, I was a mid-level executive. And Dan, what you just described as command and control and over and above through fear, I'll add, in many cases, I also grew up with in my 27 years with this company and 35 in business. As I got further along in my career, I was mentored by people who were more servant leader oriented and were respectful of other people and managed by empowering other people instead of lording over them. You're absolutely right in the book. It's really a juxtaposition between this cub's father, who is a fearsome king of a pride of lions, and his grandfather, who's also the leader of his own pride about 50 kilometers away, who is a servant leader. So this little lion sees what his father does and how other things happen in his father's pride through fear and control. And he talks to his grandfather about it. And his grandfather gives him the opposite side of how one can manage and lead through working with and respecting other folks.
I think that's relevant for today's workforce as well, because my daughters, who are, as I mentioned, in their 20s, highly mobile and not motivated by money and not tolerant of the command and control, which, as we all know, as parents, also has challenges for parenting. And so, I know you're writing for adolescents right now. How do you see these adolescents maturing into the workforce, and what can the workforce do to welcome and support and engage and provide them with fulfilling careers?
I think a lot of that really is up to the individual adolescent. The book and the principles in the book are not a panacea, but they are some very, very basic, and once one is exposed to it, very obvious principles that can be used by, as I said, not only adolescents. The book is also aimed at anybody working with youth and in their own environment where they might work. And it gives people who embrace these principles the consciousness that it's really up to them. And one of the things that I've just done is create a little 3x5 pamphlet. I'm going to go back out to everybody who has purchased the book that I know of and ask them how many of these pamphlets they want. The idea of the pamphlet is that it speaks to a number of the principles in the book, and it's kind of a pocket reference that adolescents and adults can use to remind themselves of the principles in the book and how one can manage oneself for success.
Okay, so moving specifically beyond the book, and if I may put you on the spot here, and so I understand you're saying adolescents, it's up to them individually. So are you referring to them taking responsibility for themselves? Is that?
That's part of it. Where the book has gone so far, and by the way, I have no expectations for success of the book. I think it'll find its right level of acceptance. I have been engaged with a local college, and they are now in their third semester of using the book and the exercises that are in the adjacent part of the parable in their leadership classes. And I've been involved now with 2 Zoom meetings with students, and it's very validating, but it really is, there are a number of ways in which the book can be used to reach adolescents. There is a school district in Eastern Texas that is looking at developing a course to use the book, and I have volunteered. I've done a lot of curriculum writing. I have volunteered to assist any school district, private or public, that's interested in using the book to work with faculty to develop a curriculum that can support kids. So it's not only, I'm not relying on kids themselves to just pick up and embrace this. I think it has to happen more effectively through adults with whom they deal, either teachers or parents or youth leaders and those kinds of people.
So Jed, you know, that's a great answer, and it leads me to thinking of a point. And this is not anything against the academic world or teachers, but most teachers, at least in my experience, and I've been on a school board, and I've worked with teachers in a lot of different ways. Most of them don't have a background necessarily specifically in leadership or in business. They are math teachers, they're social studies teachers, they're English teachers. They're fantastic about that. But you know, in my experience, kind of that entrepreneurial leadership, that's a skill in and of itself. How, you know, what can these teachers who want to maybe use this, where can they gain in trying? I think my question is, how can we up their leadership game? How can we help them become more knowledgeable and skilled in order to get these principles across? Does that, I think I stumbled onto a question there somehow, but does that make sense?
It does. I think one way is for people in the teaching community, especially teachers and administrators, all they need to do is look to themselves and their own experiences. The guide for adults and adolescents that are after the parable. And by the way, I wrote this as more of a teaching book. It's an 8x10 in a workbook format, both in hardcover and softcover. And the guide walks adults through introspections about their own experiences in preparation for talking with, if you will, cubs about those kinds of principles. So I think one way that can happen is for adults to look at the exercises in the book and relate to those on a very personal level. I can give you an example of that if you want to take some time to do that.
Well, and I think we want to do that, but right now our timing says we got to pay some bills. So we are gonna take a first short break, and we'll talk more about that in the second half of the show. We're going to take a short break to hear from today's spotlight sponsor, and when we come back with our guest Jed Selter for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to find out if he thinks clowns are hot or not. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Would you like to grow your business, increase revenues, and raise profits? Would more financing from your banker help you grow? Who is guiding your succession plan? Would you like more control over your business so you can sleep better at night? SME Business Wealth Builder works with business leaders and owners like you to help them grow their business and build their business wealth. For more information and to check out free resources, go to SMEwealthbuilder.com.
All right, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Phil Simchich. Our guest today is Jed Selter. And for our next segment, Hot or Not.
And Hot or Not, Jed, is where we pepper you with questions about business, about life, about lion cubs, and maybe some other kind of crazy red-nosed things. So Hot or Not, Jed. Oh, by the way, at the end, you win absolutely nothing, but let's hope you have some fun along the way. Hot or not, clowns.
Clowns are hot. Clowns are really hot. Not to be afraid of, as has happened in the past couple of years. Clowns are embracing elements, and clowns tend to bring out the joy and the laughter in people. So clowns are pretty hot.
Well, I did this on purpose because I want to talk about one of your businesses that you founded, which is a fabulous nonprofit organization, Caring Clowns. Can you talk a little bit about what Caring Clowns is and
Sure.
what you're doing around the world?
Caring Clowns International is an all-volunteer nonprofit. I am a co-founder of it, and I'm the president and the executive director. And like I said, we're all volunteer. There are about 25 of us across the country and in a couple of other countries. And our mission is twofold. It is to bring joy to people, adults and kids alike. And we also raise funds to provide grants to other nonprofits that I can vet, helping kids in need. Interestingly, this is great timing to have, for you all to have me on the podcast, which I really appreciate. Next month will be our 20th anniversary. And last month, we topped having given away a little more than $500,000 to about 60 nonprofits, 2/3 in developing countries, and the rest in the United States. And we've clowned for hundreds of thousands of kids and adults alike.
Congratulations on 20 years. And I personally have a lot of respect for clowns because our daughter, for her 5th or 6th birthday, we had booked a clown, but unfortunately Finney didn't show up. And so I ended up being the clown, and it was a moderately terrifying experience for them, but we tried to make it as much fun as possible for the kids. I was wrapped in toilet paper and beat on, and anyway, so I definitely have a lot of respect for
Phil,
clowns.
I need a picture of that. There's gotta be photo evidence, and I'm gonna be on a mission to find some of that.
I've got to tell you a very quick story. Phil, I wish I'd known you then. I could have helped you. One of the things we've done for the past 15 years is gone with a group of craniofacial surgeons to Peru, where they do full facial reconstruction on little kids. They're 8 to 9 hour surgeries, and we are their entertainment element. And when several years ago, there was a horrific earthquake about 3 hours south of Lima, we were asked to come to this little town of Chincha and help in entertaining, as they had huge triage areas for helping folks with everything from medical supplies to you name it. And we stayed with a lovely family whose house was not affected. And one of the clowns who went, there were 3 of us, one of the other clowns' name was Scooter. Still is Scooter, who's also a co-founder. And it turned out that the 16-year-old son of this couple was having his birthday while we were there. And one of the things he wanted was a scooter. So Phil, you talking about wrapping up in toilet paper reminded me of this. So we took Scooter, who's about 5'6", and we completely wrapped him in balloons. And we presented him to this 16-year-old and said, "Here's your scooter."
Interesting. Very good. Yes, kids like to be entertained of all ages, any age. So it's really interesting to see how you've taken your goal of community service and made it global and international, and helping people in different countries, different cultures, different languages. So community service extended into global service, hot or not?
Very, very hot. And it can easily be one and the same. On the relating caring clowns to the book a little bit, one of the things I mentioned in the introduction of the book is that, I think I just mentioned this, is my intent to give all of the proceeds to organizations helping kids. And I'm going to continue to do that as we go through wherever the book goes in this. And there's quite a bit of connection, actually, between supporting children via clowning and embracing children in clowning, and what the book teaches in how adolescents and those who work with adolescents can do the same in how they present themselves and how they're conscious of what they're doing.
So I want to talk a little bit about the book and just kind of keep throwing in a little bit of the business aspect of where businesses may be able to utilize this. I mean, we're in a situation where staffing is tough on every business right now. People can't find employees, and adolescents are hopefully some future entrepreneurs, but most of them are going to be future employees. Where can businesses step in? Because you talked about parents, you talked about teachers, you talked about youth leaders and things like that. I got to think that there's an opportunity here for businesses to mentor in areas of where people have interests, and these folks can end up being employees, they can end up being entrepreneurs in their life. And I wish I'd see more entrepreneurialism in schools. Is there an opportunity there for business leaders to also be those mentors?
Absolutely. The principles in the book, as I said before, are so basic that they really relate to the human element in how we all act and react among ourselves. shortly after I retired, I spent a couple of years working with school districts in conflict resolution and in strategic planning and organizational structure. And as I think about the principles in the book, they relate to all of that. And they relate to anybody who's communicating with anybody else. As Dan, you were saying, you and I both came up in the era of command and control over others as opposed to engagement with others. And I think in the business environment, the book and the principles in the book apply just as well to just those folks who deal with youth.
So you've talked about introspection being an important part of development for adolescents and everybody. And so now there's lots of awareness around benefits of meditation and exercise and things like that. But I'm not sure people are actually sitting down and spending time just quietly thinking and being introspective. So I ask you, is being introspective hot or not?
It's very hot. It's one of the most basic things we can do because it forces us, or it invites us, to look in the mirror and say, how am I acting? How am I affecting others? How are others affecting me? And is there anything I can do to improve that? One of the early things that happens in the book is that the cub says to his father, "Dad, you are so loving and kind to Mom and my two sisters when we're at home, but when I observe you in the pride, you are ferocious. And you smack other lions with your open paw, claws extended, and you make them do what you want them to do. And I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me?" And his father very quietly says, "Come with me." The cub's name is Barabu. He says, "Barabu, come with me to the edge of the pride at the cave." And he sits Barabu down and he goes nose to nose with him and roars and drools and bares his teeth and scares the heck out of this little cub. And he says to him, "The only way that you will be successful is through fear. And you need to make all of the other lions fearful of you so you can maintain control and do what you want to do in the pride. And Barabu, you must never flinch. If you flinch, you lose." And that's, of course, where the title comes from. So Barabu very quickly after that seeks out his grandfather and tells him that story. And his grandfather says, "Well, Barabu, I think your dad was just trying to show you one way that you can manage. There's another way, and that way is to respect others and get them to want to do what's in the best interest of everybody, including yourself. So in managing that way, it's okay to flinch." So that kind of introspection, if you take that, one of the other things very quickly that this little cub has is the facility to play videos back in his head of what he's experienced. So he thinks back, and this is part of the introspection this cub has. He thinks back to that situation with his father, and he writes his first Spirit of the Lion lesson. And that lesson is understand fear, but don't be fearful, because fear will rob you from the ability to think. It will not allow you to move forward. It will not allow you to communicate. Understand fear, but do not be fearful. So if you take that one step further in the guide for adults and adolescents, for that first principle, adults are asked to think of a time or a situation in which they were fearful or still are, and how can they manage that? How can they dissipate that fear? How can they act differently to be able to control what's going on? Which sets them up then to be able to talk with cubs based on their own experience.
Excellent, thank you.
So I want to get this in under the break really quickly because you made me think of a couple of things. I just wonder, because I know that there are still business leaders out there who may not even realize that they are in a less than collaborative state in a command and control situation, because that's how they came up. That's, this is how I was. And when you talk about introspection, how does someone who is in a business leader situation, whether they're CEO or managing people, how can they introspectively look at themselves and find out, hey, am I doing the best job I can? What can I learn from here? What's a good technique for that?
That is a real tough one. If one is predisposed to be command and control, I think it's very difficult for them to look at anything that is not command and control. And I think that probably takes some, regardless of the level of management, that takes some conversation and mentoring by others who are not command and control. And what those people need to understand is the business advantages of not being command and control from a business standpoint, how they will have employees who take less sick time. They will have employees who are more interested in contributing and focusing toward the success of the business. That's a real tough question.
Well, what is not tough is taking our second and last break to talk a little bit about our corporate sponsors. We're going to take that short break. And when we come back with our guest, Jed Selter, for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to talk a little more about clowns, a little clown craziness. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors: Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, Kitsap Sun Newspaper, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders from the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I am co-host Phil Simchich. Our guest today is Jed Selter, and for our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
Jed, we're going to turn up the heat on you here a little bit. We're going to see if we can make you plead the fifth. We only get to do it once, so let's see how that turns out. I mentioned some more clown shenanigans. Look, you have put on the red nose. I've seen you in your red nose and your hat and your daisy, and you look great as a clown. I got to believe in all of the places around the world that you have clowned, you've ended up in some crazy, out of the blue situation where you say, I've never saw this coming. Tell us the craziest clown situation you've ever found yourself in.
Dan, that's even though if you go to our Caring Clowns website, it says Duffy's been clowning since the invention of sand dunes, which is pretty close. It's probably now like 48 or 49 years that I've been a volunteer clown. But immediately the one that comes to mind is when a few of us through a Rotary organization wound up for 3 weeks in Ethiopia and Uganda. And we were doing the clowning element, of course, with all of the kids. The typical schools in Ethiopia and Uganda are like 500 kids. And they're all in the same uniforms for that school. And somehow they're able to manage directing these children to go where they want them to go. I was on my way by myself with a couple of Rotarians who decided to stop at a school that I was totally unprepared for. I didn't have a lot of clown gimmicks with me, although I was in makeup. And they stopped the van we were in, and in this big field. And as I was coming out of the van and standing in the middle of this field, one by one, these kids did double takes and saw that there was something unusual there. And like lemmings, I'll say it was 300 to 400 kids came rushing toward me. And I was luckily able to find a brick to stand on so I could be a little bit above their height and eye level, and just started to do some extemporaneous clown things, which was really entertaining. But I have to tell you, that was a pretty scary, that was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. And I'm a pretty seasoned public speaker. That was not what I was used to in public speaking or public clowning at all, but it was a great experience.
So speaking of students, let's say that you've been asked to speak to a group of high school seniors and say it's their graduation. What advice would you give them? What would you tell them?
Considering that I'm probably repeating myself several times, I would talk to them about being true to themselves. I would talk to them about humility. And I have done speaking like that for graduations of award winners and scholarships. And I've always ended my talk by using a story that I don't know the origins of, but it essentially comes down to understanding oneself and looking at what you can do to support others. I've done this enough that I'm no longer surprised that those kinds of principles, which kids, seniors in high school, others rarely hear from anybody, let alone a public speaker that's been invited to speak in front of them for whatever occasion. I can see that they sit and they think about what's being said. And it is not unusual for parents and students to come up to me afterward and say, that's exactly what I needed. It's very useful for me.
So
Awesome.
I got to ask you a question that we've been asking all of our guests. And so you're no exception. I'm going to make you start a business, Jed. It's a business different from anything really kind of in a sense that you've been doing. So you can't use clowning. You have a hobby. You want to turn it into a business. What's the hobby? What's the business?
That's a real good one. At this point, I'm going to flake out on you. I have started a couple of different businesses, none of which were my passion. My passion has been connecting with kids and adults who work with kids and improving people's lives through things like this book and Caring Clowns International. I had that business I mentioned where I was working with schools, and the consulting element of that was more effort in marketing that I wanted, and I decided to close that business and go into clowning. There's a very good reason why everything I am doing is volunteer oriented, because I think it sends the message that I'm not in this for financial gain, and I think people relate to that. So I'm at that stage in my life. I think there's more for me to do. I don't know what that is. I've started writing another book, but right now my focus is to use the Lion Who Flinched book and the principles to get to people so they can actually use it. So for a future, I don't know what that future is, and I'm not really
so I'm going to, before Phil asks one of the closing questions, you very artfully pled the fifth there. You didn't give me, so I'm not making you do one. We want to know a hobby. What would you, other than what you just talked about, you got to have some sort of a hobby. What's a hobby that you'd turn into a business, not in real life, but just in your mind?
It probably would be public speaking on these kinds of principles. If I were to turn it back into a business like I had before.
Okay.
I'll share a fear that I have with you. one of the things I always wanted to do was to be a classical guitarist. And I think my fingers are still limber enough that I could probably do that. In fact, I wanted to be a flamenco guitarist.
So that's it. That's Phil. That's the hobby. That's the best one I've heard yet. We're going to turn him into a flamenco guitarist. That's it. You're next, Phil. You're up.
What song would you play?
Probably something, if it was classical, it would probably be something by Bach. But that's a real stretch. That's a real stretch.
On a more serious note, and I think it's just relevant given the proliferation of social media these days, how would you recommend, or how do you use social media to promote your cause? Share your message.
I have a website for the book, thelionwhoflinched.com, and on the website one can go to buy the book and purchase through online Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and it's obviously in all kinds of other bookstores. With my connections with Peru and a network there, we just published the book in Spanish, and the website's the best place to do that. I am going to be reading sections of the book on that website, and I'm reaching out to people through, not too much, but through Facebook and others, to more directly with people to try and get advocates who are in a position where the book can be used.
Awesome. Jed, thank you so much for being a guest here today on the Shrimp Tank. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you and learn more about you and your book, how can they get more information?
Probably three ways. One is to go to the website where you can hit contact and it will come to me. Another is through my personal email, duffyboy1224@gmail.com, and or through the Caring Clowns International website and hit contact me. That's another way. And in several of those, my phone number is also there, which I'd prefer not to put on this podcast, but there are ways people can get hold of me. And I'll close with saying that if there's any way I can support anybody who's interested in working with these principles, preferably through the book, but aside from the book, I'm just totally available to do that. As a result of the Zoom meetings with some students, I'm in the process of mentoring 3 folks who are going after their master's degrees. And I've done a lot of mentoring. So I'm just, that's my final thought. I'm just available to help people however I can that way.
Awesome. Thanks, Jed. Everyone, make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and wherever you get your podcasts, such as iHeart, Apple, or Google. Please follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Phil, thanks for joining us today. And of course, Jed, thanks for being our guest here today. Our next show, everybody, will be on Wednesday, March 23rd. Phil said it. Go like us on Facebook so you can watch us live stream. Wednesday, March 23rd. My co-host will be Michelle Baumberger. Our guest will be Shenandoah Davis with Adventure Nannies. So we're going to find out how adventuresome nannies can be, sounds like. So listen, in the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp